Johnny Cash spent decades keeping one story locked away. Not out of malice, but out of respect for a friendship most people never truly understood. The world knew Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash as titans of American music, but what Cash revealed about their relationship in his final years painted a picture nobody expected. Memphis, 1954. A flatbed truck parked outside a Cat's drugstore on Lamar Avenue. 300 people, mostly teenage girls, screaming at a 19-year-old kid with one single to his name. Johnny Cash stood in that crowd, watching Elvis Presley sing the same two songs over and over. He had no idea this moment would change everything. Cash was 22, married to Vivian, and freshly signed to Sun Records. Elvis was younger, single, and about to explode. After that drugstore performance, Elvis did something unexpected. He invited Johnny and Vivian to his next show at the Eagle's Nest, an adult club in Memphis. Cash would remember every detail of that July night for the rest of his life. The venue was almost empty. Teenagers could not get in, so maybe 15 people showed up. But Elvis performed like he was playing Madison Square Garden. Cash sat there, transfixed. Years later, he would write that he thought Elvis was great that night, but what really struck him was something most people never noticed. Elvis could play guitar, really play. Cash recalled that Elvis was a fabulous rhythm player. He would start into That's All Right, Mama with his own guitar alone, and you did not want to hear anything else. It is a detail that got buried under everything that came later. After Elvis left Sun Records, Cash never heard that raw guitar work on his albums again. The producers had other plans. But here's what nobody talks about. While the world was falling in love with Elvis's voice and his hips, Elvis was busy promoting someone else. He'd just become friends with Johnny Cash, and he couldn't stop playing Cash's music everywhere he went. Small cafes across the South, tour buses, anywhere with a jukebox. June Carter didn't know who Johnny Cash was in the mid-50s. She was touring with Elvis, part of the Carter sisters, and one day she heard Elvis trying to tune his guitar and sing Cry, Cry, Cry. She admitted she'd never heard of the guy. Elvis looked at her like she'd just said she'd never heard of the Sun. "Oh, you'll know Cash. The whole world will know Johnny Cash. He's a friend of mine." Think about that. Elvis Presley, on the verge of becoming the biggest star on the planet, spent his time championing another artist. Not just in private, but actively introducing him to people, playing his records, building him up. And June? She'd eventually become Johnny's wife, the love of his life. Elvis introduced them, in a way, through music, through constant promotion, through belief in his friend's talent. The whole tour, Elvis played Johnny Cash on every jukebox they passed. He'd tell June, "That's what drives the girls crazy. Cash don't have to move a muscle, he just sings and stands there." There was genuine admiration in those words. No jealousy, no competition, just one artist recognizing another. December 4th, 1956. Sun Records Studio. Carl Perkins was recording. Jerry Lee Lewis was on piano. Then Elvis walked in with his girlfriend, just dropping by to say hello. What happened next became legend. They started jamming. Gospel songs. Bill Monroe tunes. Pure, unfiltered music with no agenda except the joy of playing together. Johnny Cash was there from the beginning. He would later have to correct the record because some accounts left him out or minimized his presence. He wrote that he was there. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave. His voice is on the tape, though you have to listen carefully. He was farthest from the microphone, singing higher than usual to match Elvis's key, but he guarantees he is there. They called it the $1 Million Quartet session. 4 guys who were reshaping American music, caught in a moment of pure creation. No egos, no handlers, just friends making music. But something else was happening in that room, something Cash would only fully articulate decades later. He was watching Elvis become something larger than life, and he was beginning to understand what that would cost, not just for Elvis, but for everyone around him. The friendship they were building in those Sun Records days had an expiration date neither of them could see coming. What Cash witnessed in Elvis during those early years would haunt him long after the king was gone. Because the Elvis he knew, the kid who loved cheeseburgers and gospel music, was about to disappear into something the world demanded he become. Johnny watched from the wings. Every single show. He never missed the chance. None of them did. Because Elvis wasn't just good, he was magnetic in a way that defied explanation. The charisma wasn't something you could learn or fake. You either had it or you didn't, and Elvis had it in abundance. Years later, Cash would say the best performer probably was Elvis Presley. He said he did not think anybody could touch him. This wasn't casual praise. Johnny had seen everyone. He'd shared stages with legends, watched countless artists work their craft. But Elvis operated on a different frequency entirely. The way he moved, the way he connected with an audience, it was something beyond technique or practice. It was instinct, pure and untamed. In 1959, they toured together. Johnny would open, starting his set with a slapstick Elvis impression, swiveling his hips and belting out Heartbreak Hotel. The crowd would laugh and cheer. Then Elvis would take the stage and return the favor, doing his version of the Man in Black. It was playful, affectionate, the kind of thing only real friends could pull off without it feeling like competition. But underneath the jokes and the mutual respect, something was shifting. Elvis was 19 when they first worked together, a kid who loved cheeseburgers, girls, and his mother. Not necessarily in that order. More like his mother, then girls, then cheeseburgers. He was full of fun, obsessed with his work, his music, his guitar. Gospel songs made him light up. He was genuine in a way that's rare when you're that talented. Johnny preferred that Elvis, the Elvis of the 50s, raw, hungry, playing his own guitar with a rhythm that made you forget anyone else existed. He'd start into That's All Right, Mama with his own guitar alone, and you didn't want to hear anything else, Cash remembered. After Sun Records, something changed. The guitar disappeared from Elvis's recordings. The production got bigger, glossier, more controlled. It wasn't bad, not by any stretch. It sold millions. It made Elvis the biggest star in the world. But it wasn't the same. Johnny noticed. He didn't say much about it publicly, but he noticed. Their gap started to widen, not because of any falling out, but because their paths were diverging. Elvis went to Hollywood, made his films, recorded his hits under the careful management of Colonel Tom Parker. Johnny stayed on the road, playing prisons and small towns, building his own kind of legacy. They weren't as close as people assumed. Johnny was older, married to Vivian at the time. They liked each other, sure, but they weren't tight. Different priorities, different lives. And then Elvis started closing his world. You could see it happening if you paid attention. The walls going up around Graceland, literally and figuratively. The inner circle getting smaller, more protective, more paranoid. Old friends would show up and get turned away at the gates. It was humiliating for them, crushing even. Johnny took the hint. He didn't try to push through, didn't attempt to invade Elvis's privacy. He would later write that he was so glad he had not. Because watching those rejections happen to others, seeing the embarrassment and hurt, that would have been worse than the distance. It was a choice that showed who Johnny was. Some people would have used their connection, would have name-dropped their way past security, or gone to the press with stories about being shut out. Johnny just stepped back. If Elvis needed space, needed to retreat from the world, then that is what he needed. Friendship sometimes means knowing when to leave someone alone. They never worked together again after the 50s. They never shared a stage once Elvis became the Elvis everyone knows. Two parallel tracks had briefly intersected, then moved apart. But there is something his son John Carter would reveal much later, a detail that adds another layer to everything. Johnny was jealous of Elvis, not just of the fame or the success, but of something more personal. June Carter had that twinkle in her eye whenever Elvis's name came up, a sparkle that Johnny noticed, and that their son remembered decades later. Their son recalled that June would say outright that his father had always been jealous of Elvis. She even admitted once that she had wondered what would have happened if she had fallen in love with Elvis instead. The man who introduced them, who played Johnny's music on every jukebox, who championed him before the world knew his name, had also created a ghost that would linger in Johnny's marriage. That's the thing about friendship at that level. Nothing stays simple. August 16th, 1977. The news came through like a shockwave. Elvis Presley, dead at 42. Johnny heard it the way most of the world did, through television reports and frantic phone calls. The king had fallen. For Johnny, it wasn't just the loss of a cultural icon. It was the end of something that started in Memphis 23 years earlier, when two young men with dreams stood in the same room at Sun Records, both hungry, both believing they could change music forever. He didn't rush to speak publicly. That wasn't his way. While others scrambled for interviews, sharing their memories and theories, Johnny stayed quiet, processing, grieving in private. But when he did speak, it was measured, protective even. He remembered Elvis as he truly was, not the caricature the media had created in those final years. Johnny would say that Elvis had problems with gossip, rumor, and lies. He was very sensitive, easily hurt by the stories people told about him being on dope and so on. It was a defense, subtle, but firm. Because Johnny knew what it was like to be misunderstood, to have your struggles broadcast and dissected by people who'd never walked in your shoes. That Christmas, Johnny organized something meaningful. His television special brought together what remained of the old Sun Records crew: Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Roy Orbison. They performed the gospel song "This Train is Bound for Glory" in Elvis's honor. No spectacle, no grand speeches. Just four men who'd been there at the beginning, singing for their fallen friend. The performance carried a weight that words couldn't. These were the survivors, the ones who'd made it through the madness of fame with varying degrees of damage, standing together to remember the one who hadn't. Years passed. Johnny kept making music, kept touring, kept reinventing himself in ways Elvis never got the chance to. The American recordings era brought him a renaissance in the 90s, introducing him to a whole new generation. He recorded until the very end, right up to his death in 2003. His son John Carter would later point out the difference between the two legacies. "Dad carried on and made music up until the very end," he said. In some way, his legacy's quite a bit different, but he always appreciated and loved Elvis. Different paths, different outcomes. But Johnny never forgot where it started. In interviews, even decades later, he'd return to those early memories. The Eagles Nest show with 15 people in the crowd. Elvis's rhythm guitar that disappeared from his records. The kid who loved cheeseburgers and his mother. That is the Elvis Johnny held on to, not the sequined jumpsuit version, not the bloated final years, but the raw talent who sat down at a piano in December 1956 and sang gospel songs with his friends. "The best performer probably was Elvis Presley," Johnny said in a 1988 interview. "I don't think anybody could touch him." Even after everything, the jealousy over June, the distance, the diverging careers, that assessment never changed. He meant it. Elvis was so good that every show Johnny did with him, he would stand in the wings and watch. They all did. That kind of charisma cannot be faked or manufactured. The truth Johnny carried, the one he shared in his autobiography and in scattered interviews, was not explosive or scandalous. It was honest. They were friends, but not as close as people assumed. They were rivals in the way all artists are rivals, each pushing the other to be better. They had complicated feelings that mixed admiration with envy, loyalty with hurt. Elvis introduced Johnny to June, then became a specter in that marriage. Elvis championed Johnny's music before the world knew his name, then left him behind as he rocketed into orbit. What Johnny revealed was not designed to tear down Elvis's legacy. It was meant to add dimension to it, to show that the king was human, flawed, complicated. Their friendship was real but messy. Fame changes things in ways nobody can prepare for. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone drowning is not to jump in after them. The secret was not buried treasure or hidden scandal. It was simply this: two men started together, dreaming the same dream, and that dream split them apart while binding them forever. Johnny Cash spent his life honoring that complexity, refusing to simplify it into something neat and comfortable. That is what made his final reflections on Elvis matter. They were true. And maybe that is the real revelation. Not some buried secret or explosive confession, but the acknowledgement that greatness costs everyone around it something. Johnny paid his price watching from the wings while Elvis soared. He lived with June's sparkle-eyed memories of the king. He built his own legacy in the shadow of someone he helped create. The Elvis Johnny knew died long before 1977. The kid with the guitar at Sun Records, singing gospel songs and eating cheeseburgers, was swallowed by something bigger than any of them understood at the time. What Johnny protected all those years was not Elvis's reputation. It was the memory of who his friend actually was before the world got hold of him. Two boys from humble beginnings, standing in the same Memphis studio, both convinced they would change music forever. They were both right, but only one of them got to keep making music until his final breath, learning and evolving and finding new audiences. The other became frozen in time, trapped in the image the world demanded he maintain. Johnny's silence was not about hiding truth. It was about honoring complexity in a world that demands simple stories. His final words on Elvis were not meant to diminish or to elevate. They were meant to remember the cost of greatness and to keep alive the memory of a friend. They were meant to remind us that behind every legend is a person, and behind every friendship between legends is something messier and more human than we want to believe. The whole world knew Johnny Cash. The whole world knew Elvis Presley. But only they knew what it cost to build dreams together, then watch those dreams pull them apart.